So let's begin with our first ESXi install, which is the first thing that you would do in any vSphere deployment. So the first step you would deploy is the ESXi, and then you deploy your vCenter virtual machine. You can also do vCenter on a physical machine, but it is always recommended to do it at a virtual machine so that you can leverage the benefits like Esxi and TRS. So when you deploy vCenter as a VM, you can use all those features and protect your VMware virtual machines as well from any planned or unplanned downtime. So let's understand what are the requirements to install ESXi. Okay, so the first thing that you can do is if let's say if you're doing a fresh deployment on and you want to purchase hardware, or if you have your existing hardware and if you want to find out whether it is supported or it will support the version of ESXi that you're going to install. So you can go to VMware HCL, which stands for VMware Hardware Compatibility List. So you can find out. So let's see that page and how we can use that. All right. So if you simply do a Google search and type this like VMware HCL, it will take you to this page. So this is how this page looks like. You have various options. So let's say the product release version. So here you would select which version of ESXi you are trying to deploy. Let's say if I say 6.7 for example. So now it will show me what kind of hardware I have. Let's say if I'm having a rack server or I'm having a blade server. So if you select all, it will list everything. So it's better, it's always better to narrow down your search. So let's say if I'm looking for a blade, for example, so I will select blade, and then it says the partner name. So partner name would be, let's say I have a Dell server, okay? Or let's say I have a HP server. So I can simply select HP and all HP blade servers. Now, let's say you want to try out specific features which have hardware dependency, for example, fault tolerance or VM direct path IO, or if you want to, you can simply select all, right? So this gives you a flexibility. So let's say in future, if you plan to use any of these features, so you would already have the hardware that supports all of these features. But again, that is going to drive your cost up or down depending on how many features you would select here. So it's always good to be sure, rather than buying something which you are not using and then you have to pay extra for that. Okay, so now I will select what is the minimum certified memory. For example, how much memory you want to put on your host. So let's select all in this. Now number of sockets. This is pretty important. In the sense because the VMware license, the ESXi license is bind to your socket. So depending on your let's say if I buy a 4-socket system, or let's say a 2-socket system, so that would let's say a 4-socket system would consume somewhere around 4 licenses. So it's like you're buying a very high configuration ESXi host, which is not recommended. So it is better to have a medium configuration ESXi host rather than having a beefy ESXi host. That I will explain later once we start understanding the high availability. So for right now, we can select all, because right now we're just testing how do we actually use this compatibility guide. Okay, and then how many cores per socket. So let's select all. So because right now we just selected HP, so it will list out all the HP's blade servers which are compatible with ESXi 6.7. Okay, so I'm just selecting all in the rest of the fields. So if I do update and view results, so if you see now I have got multiple servers. So if you want, let's say if you want to export this list to a CSV, you can do that. Right, so you don't have to come again and do the same thing. So let's say let's see this one. So it says HP ProLiant BL 460 generation 10 server. So this is again a HP ProLiant BL stand for blade server 460C. That's the model number. In generation 10, it specifies the latest generation. So right now they're running on Gen 10 servers, HP. Okay. So now in this list, you can find out whether your hardware is there or not. So if it is there, then definitely it's a good news for you, and then you can definitely go ahead and then get the image from HP, the E6i image from HP. It's always good to have a vendor E6i image because that contains all the specific driver for that hardware model. So you can always download that go to the HP website and you can download that specific image for your blade server. Okay. So if you see this for specific model, it supports 6.7, 6.7 update 1, 6.7 update 2. So that's a good deal. Okay, now try to understand the minimum requirements that you need for E6i. So I mean, any model you would choose here will definitely satisfy the E6i requirements. But to understand what are the basic requirements for the E6i, you should go through this E6i hardware requirements page on VMware website. So what's the minimum you need? So to find out whether a platform is supported, you have to go to VMware HCL that we have already done. So on any E6i machine, I mean, you need minimum 2 CPU cores that would be used by your hypervisor itself. So you need minimum 2 CPU cores. But yes, in enterprise system, you definitely have more than that. So you are covered from that point. So this is listing the minimum requirement that we need. Okay. So you need a 64-bit processor. So as per this document, I mean, majority of the hardware vendors or the hardware which was released after September 2006, they are 64-bit. But it's always good to check. So you have HCL to find out that. And then you have NX XD. So NX stands for no execute and XD stands for execute disable. So they both perform the same function. NX is an AMD implementation of no execute, and XD is execute disable for Intel. So what it does is it simply marks some area in memory or flags an area in memory to avoid any unwanted code execution, because hypervisors the E6i hypervisor boots into memory. So it wants to mark that area as secure, and we don't want to execute any kind of code in that area. Okay, so minimum RAM you need is like 4 GB, but again, as you would be hosting your virtual machines on those E6i, so you would be needing more RAM depending on your requirements. So these days, the memory configuration of latest generation blade servers or rack servers is pretty high. I've seen as good as like 1 terabyte of RAM or maybe more. But again, that is again going to decide the cost factor. So you have to understand your organization limits and what kind of budget you have. So based on that, you will take your decision. And to support 64-bit virtual machines, you need to have Intel VTX, which is like Intel Virtualization Technology, or AMD RVI, that is Rapid Virtualization Indexer. So you need these features to be enabled so that you can virtualize 64-bit of virtual machines. If you don't have this on your hardware, so you can only virtualize 32-bit of virtual machines. So 32-bit machines have a limitation. They don't detect memory more than 4 gigabytes. But again, so all the latest hardware, they support all these features. So there's nothing you have to worry about. Okay, so minimum you need a 1 gigabit Ethernet controller or more. It's better to have a 10G for better performance, because on E6i you'll be running a lot of virtual machines. So to handle the load of virtual machines, network traffic, it's better to have a 10G card and having multiple cards to avoid single point of failure. And then the supported you need to have like local disk controller, which is able to support RAID configuration. So generally, what you do is if you in majority of the scenarios, people deploy E6i on the local disk and then store the virtual machine on the SAN storage. It can be iSCSI SAN or fiber channel SAN. So having a local disk and in a RAID configuration, so it gives you a good performance, and a RAID in the sense you need to it needs to be fault tolerant. Let's say if I put it on a single disk, uh, uh, it would be a trouble. So let's say if that disk goes down, my ESXi would be crash. So it's better to have RAID 1 or RAID 10 configuration. So you can, we're not going to talk about the RAID, but let like discuss the RAID in detail. But let me tell you how RAID 1 works, for example. So there would be like two disks in RAID 1. So one would be holding the data, and the second disk would be the mirror. So let's say in case any of the disk goes down, so we still have our data intact, and it should be able to support whatever operating system installation is there, and there would be no crashes. It can sustain any like a single disk failure in a RAID 1 configuration. Okay, so now let's see how to install our first ESXi. So we don't have any physical hardware right now, but we can always try this out on a VMware workstation. So if you remember, we talked about type 2 hypervisor. So I have have this host machine. So I can show you the specs which I'm running on this specific virtual machine right now. So I'm having around 64 gigabytes of memory, which is quite good to run these kind of labs. But yeah, you can always get by. It's good to have at least 32 gigabytes or 24 gigabytes. So you can try out, you can create multiple ESXi hosts, vCenters, and then you can try out all the clustering features. Okay, so let me bring up my VMware workstation, and we'll start to deploy our first ESXi host. So I will try to imitate or go a little bit ahead of these requirements. So it says minimum 2 CPU cores and 4 gigabytes of RAM. Okay, so let's say I hit on create a new virtual machine, and then select the custom option. So you can customize the VM to a high extent. So this will show you the VMware hardware compatibility. So this would also be applicable like once you have a ESXi installed and what kind of virtual machines you install. So the virtual machine hardware compatibility decides the specs of the virtual machine, like how many CPUs and how much RAM you can put, how many disk controllers, all those things. So for this is VMware Workstation 12, and whatever VMs I create on this, I can go up to this much of, this is the upper limit of the virtual machine hardware I can deploy on VMware Workstation. So max 64 gigs of memory, 16 processors, 10 network adapters, and up to 8 terabytes. So let's get started. So now deploy the first ESXi. So I have to provide the ISO image. Okay. So in my case, I'm using a generic ISO from VMware. Again, it's in your case, it would be your vendor specific hypervisor image ISOs. So that you would use to boot your physical server, and you can, let's say if it's a HP server, you can do the remote management through ILO, and you can boot that bare metal server from the ISO and then start installing the ESXi. So in this case, on my virtual machine, I will simply do this VMware visor. This is the ISO for the ESXi. If you see, it's 6.7. This is the build number, x86 64-bit, and the size of the disk is somewhere around 300 megabytes. So I will just select this ISO. Okay, so if you see it has detected the ESXi, I will do next. So I will just provide a name for my virtual machine. So let's say I will name it as my So I've given this name ESXi1, and this is where I'll be storing my ESXi virtual machine. So in case of production, I mean, you will be doing this on a physical server. So you need to understand you will be doing some sort of preparation before you start installing an ESXi. So in a physical server, you would be configuring your RAID. So you can simply check your vendor documentation how to set up RAID, be it a HP server or Cisco server or Dell server. So how to set up RAID. Generally, it's RAID 1 or RAID 10 when it comes to the operating system, be it any operating system, not just ESXi. Or if you're installing a Windows OS or Linux OS on the local drive, you would be configuring RAID 1 or RAID 10. the BIOS settings. So just make sure the BIOS in the BIOS setting, verify all the options we talked about, which is like Intel VTX or AMD RVI. These options are present and they are enabled, and the no execute or execute disable bit should be this option should be enabled in the BIOS. And in the power profile or the power setting, always make sure when you are installing ESXi that high performance mode is selected. So now after creating the VM, once we power it on, it's going to boot from the ISO itself. So right now it's just loading the installer. So it will take few minutes once we reach this option of installing ESXi. So it's right now loading the files from the ISO, so it will take some time. So once it is the ISO is booted, you'll be presented with this option of installation. So hit enter on this option, accept the license agreement, and then it's going to start scanning all the local disks attached to the server. So in this case, we just attach this 10 gigabytes disk. So I will simply hit enter on this option. Select the keyboard layout. So for me, it's US default. Then I will be typing my root password. So make sure that you are typing it correctly, and because we will be needing this password later on to connect to our ESXi host. And once it performed the analysis, the scanning of the disk, so just select the F11 option to install. So that's pretty much about the installation. So after this step, the server will reboot and it will perform some auto configuration. It's going to get IP from DHCP, and you'll be seeing the DCUI, the direct console user interface, after the reboot. And so once the server reboots, we are going to explore that option and how to use it to perform initial configuration on the ESXi host. So once the install completes, you'll get this option to reboot. Hit enter and it's going to reboot the server. So once the server reboots, you'll be seeing this screen. This is called the DCUI, the direct console user interface. So if you see, it's showing me on the top, it's showing me the ESXi version, the build number, which is same. If you remember in the ISO itself, we saw this build number, and it says the VMware Incorporated VMware Virtual Platform. And in case it's a physical server, of course, so it will show you the model number of the specific physical server, HP BL460 or HP DL380. So whatever model is there, it will show you up here, and it will show you the specs, how many cores and how much memory. So in my case, I just gave it 2 cores, around 12 gigs of memory. So now it says to manage this host, you can go to 192.168.147.169. So if you see, this IPs has been assigned to the DHCP. Okay. So now if I want to make changes to this server, I have to press F2 option, and to perform shutdown or a reboot, I can press the F12 option, but it will prompt me for the root password. So that's the one that you set up during installation. So I press F2 here. I put my root password, and these are the options on the following screen that you would see. Okay, so configure password. So in case if you want to change your root password, you can do it right here. Okay, so put the old password and set up your new password. Configure management network. So this is the management network of my ESXi host. So this is the address that you would use to manage your ESXi host, and to reach out, or let's say to ping your ESXi host, you would be using this address. Or if you're adding your ESXi host to your vCenter, so this is a network that would be used to talk to the ESXi. Okay. VLAN option, again, the VLAN option, for example, if your ESXi host is connected to a network port where you have trunk configuration enabled, so then you have to specify the VLAN in which the ESXi IP belongs. Otherwise, your ESXi will not talk to the network. So if it is an access port, and only a specific VLAN is allowed on the switch port side, so you don't really have to specify this VLAN option. Okay. So now let's test out, let's configure our IP address. I want to make my IP address as static. So in my case, I will be setting up, I will select this option as set static IPv4 address. So in my case, I'm simply taking the same address which was assigned by DHCP. You should not do that in production. It's a lab thing, so it does not matter much because I know I'll be the one using this IP. So in case of DHCP, you will never make the IP as static because the DHCP IP keep on changing. So it's better to have some IP reserved for your ESXi, and then just configure that IP as static over here. Okay. So hit enter on this option. DNS configuration. So this is also important. So you want your ESXi should be able to resolve all the names to IP addresses. So you should specify your DNS server. So I already have a DNS server set up in my lab, which is also running as a virtual machine. So that's the IP of this. I will just try to change it. That's 192.168.147.131. Okay. And I will try to give it a name as ESXi1. So that's my name of my ESXi. So I will try to give it a fully qualified domain name. So let's see. First, let me go to my ADDNS server, and then I will specify this ESXi. I will create a DNS entry for this ESXi. So okay. So the IP was 192.168.147.169. So this is my previous entry from the lab, so I can use the same one. Okay, so this is the name, ESXi1.test.lab. Okay. Alright, so now here I've specified on my management network, I made the IP static. I have specified the DNS configuration, and it would be ESXi1.test.lab. Enter. Now once I configure everything, and if I try to go back to the previous page by hitting escape, it will ask me to restart the management network. So every time I'm going to make changes to my management network, it is asking me to restart the management network services. So I will hit yes. Okay. Now, yeah. So now I'm back on the previous page. And now I will do a test management network. So in this case, what it will do is it will try to ping my local interface, my gateway, and my DNS. And it will also check the DNS name resolution, whether it is working or not. So I will hit test. So it's the gateway is pinging. So that has passed the DNS, and it's also resolving my ESXi host name to the IP address. So this part works perfectly. So now we'll talk about rest of the option here. So network restore option that I will talk about later on. Once I start setting up the virtual networking, I will come here and show you what option this does. But you can simply, for now, you can simply understand like this option is going to bring it back the ESXi network to the factory state. So whenever we install the ESXi, by default there would be a default virtual switch, standard switch. So that contains a management network and a virtual machine port group there by default. So if I keep on adding more networks to my virtual switch, and let's say if I want to wipe out every configuration, I will simply come here and I will do network restore option. So it will again remove everything from that virtual switch, and it will again bring me back to that initial stage. It will take it will like bring it back to the auto configuration thing. The ESXi will take IP from DSCP and everything, and we have to do the entire management network configuration once again. So configure keyboard. If you want to change your keyboard layout, just in case, you can do that. Troubleshooting options. If we select this option, there is a ESXi shell. So I mean, there's an inbuilt command line shell on this ESXi which can be accessible through multiple ways. So if on this console itself, if I press Alt F1, so this is how you access the inbuilt ESXi shell. But right now I don't see any login prompt. Reason being, if you see on the right, it says it is disabled. The ESXi shell is disabled. So once I hit enter on this option, so now it says the ESXi shell is enabled. So if I go to Alt F1, so now I see a login prompt. So I can log in here, and so this is where I can type my commands. I can do command line troubleshooting. Let's say if I want to find out any specific information, or if I want to view any logs, or if I want to, let's say sometime what happens is like the VM is non-responsive from the GUI and you have to restart that virtual machine or kill that virtual machine. So you will simply come here and do it. So there are commands for that. So we'll see that once we start building our VMs and how to troubleshoot them. So I will show you how exactly you can troubleshoot the VMs from the command line and how you can find out different information from this command line console. Enable SSH. Again, this is also one more option of accessing this inbuilt shell remotely with the help of some SSH software like PuTTY, or you have other. You will find a lot of applications that you can use, SSH console applications. So you can enable or disable SSH. So you can enable these options from here, or you can also do it from GUI. So I'll show you all those options once we start managing it. Okay. So DCUI idle timeout. So let's say if you want to set up a timeout, if you leave the session running, it should auto log out after some amount of time. So in this case, it is 10 minutes. So you can set it as per your preference, as per your environment security best practices. So I will leave it as default. Restart management agent. So this is this option is going to restart all the services related to ESXi, like hostd, FDM, the watchdog service. There are multiple services. So it's going to restart all the services, but this option should be used with caution because it can also render your host non-responsive. You should always make sure that you should use this option as a last resort when your host become non-responsive. And sometimes I've seen this option also not work, so reboot is the only option you're left with. So you should always make sure before you hit this option, you should know what you're doing, because all the VMs running on this hung host, they can become unstable. So sometimes reboot is the last resort. Okay, so now go back to the previous screen. I have disabled the option. I will show you how to enable it once again from a different place. So escape, and I'm back to the system customization page on DCUI. You can view system logs from here. So if I hit enter and if I hit the number, it will show you the specific log. So see, number 1 for this log, number 2 for VM kernel. So the majority of times you would be coming to this second log, the VM kernel log, where you would see the issues. VPX, the log number 5 virtual center agent, which is again a VPX agent. So once you start managing your ESXi host from vCenter, this is a log you would look in case if your host is not able to communicate or is having some issues while you're managing it with vCenter. So you can come to this VPX log. Hostd logs, this is again one of the most important logs. So hostd is the service that takes care of everything, all all the virtual machines and their processes are being managed by the hosted servers. Okay. View support information. So in this page, if you see, it's a serial number, the license serial number. Right now it says evaluation. So evaluation, what it means is like you can try out this product for at least 60 days. So VMware has the evaluation license for 60 days. So once I apply a license key to this, so you can also find it out from here, and you can find it out from vCenter as well. SSL thumbprint. So this is like a self-signed security certificate. So if you have your if you have a CA into your environment, a certificate authority, so you can deploy the certificates from there as well. So I'll show you that option, how to point your vCenter to your certificate authority. And the last option, reset system configuration, is like, you know, bringing everything back to the factory state. So whatever changes that you have done across the host, all the configuration that you have made, it can be wiped out in one go. But yeah, after this option, you have to reboot, and then it will come back to the default state. Like whenever you install the ESXi host the first time and then you do a reboot, so it's like a factory state, you can say. So it will wipe up everything. Again, use this option with caution, and you should know what you're doing. Okay. So this is the end of this install ESXi and managing that ESXi with the DCUI Direct Console User Interface. So how do you access this option in your case? Like if it's a physical server, because you will access this DCUI using the ILO if it's an HP server, DRAC if it's a Dell server, and CIMC if it's a Cisco server. Okay, so we will conclude this session, and I'll see you in the next session where we will see how to perform the rest of the configuration on ESXi with the help of the GUI. Okay, I'll see you in next session.